Hi, I'm VerBurg, and the title of our talk is Grooming a Teenager. I'm really looking forward to going through this little seminar booklet with you. I find that every time I go through it with somebody, many new insights are gained into life, and I see much excitement on the face of the individual. Before I go into the booklet with you, let me just say this, that I have found that amongst youth leaders, parents, and people of just about all walks of life, that when they are confronted with working with or raising a teenager, generally there is something of panic. They seem to be afraid of them. I have often experienced within church work that when someone is asked to take the teen department, it's kind of, boy, I don't know if I can handle that. That's really something nowadays. I don't understand teenagers. I don't know where I'd pick it up. I don't even know what they want. I find, too, that many parents who do a very fine job raising them as a child, when they reach the teen years, they panic. And the question is, why? Everybody, I suppose, would have an answer of their own. Let me give you one that I believe hits right into the target area. I believe basically that the reason that parents and youth leaders, by and large, fear handling the teen years is probably because when they were young and in their teens, they weren't trusted, and as a result, they have not learned how to trust a teenager. If there's anything that you would gain from this seminar and this little booklet, I would certainly hope it would be this, and that is that a teenager is a person, much like yourself, who can and ought to be trusted, and a person with whom you can have some wonderful experiences in life if you will sit down long enough to talk with them and listen to them when they talk. As you take your little booklet, I certainly hope you will stay with me. Don't read ahead. Don't linger back on a page when we've gone to the next page. You'll get lost. When we have finished, you can go back and discuss any part of this that you wish to. Now, I might be talking to you as an individual, maybe as a husband and wife, maybe as a pastor, or maybe I'm talking to a class, be it a Bible study, Sunday school class, maybe even a larger group. But I would certainly hope that we could stay together in the pages of our material, and when we finish, there will be an air of expectancy and excitement with you, that you will be able to say, I am really looking forward to pitching back in and doing something with those teenagers. Many parents, after they have done a fine job in childhood, raising the child, panic in the teen years and undo everything they did. Many churches do a very fine job raising the child as far as the Sunday school curriculum and so forth is concerned, and when they get to the teen years, they sort of panic with it, and they unravel everything that they knitted together so well in the childhood years. As you go to page 1 in your booklet, I'm going to read along from line to line, and I'm going to give you some added material and added thoughts as we go, things that will help stimulate you in the right direction to gain insight into their lives, that you can be of more benefit to them in some of the most crucial and precious years of their life. Now, the purpose of this booklet is to show you the basic dynamics necessary for grooming and cultivating into the life of a teenager what you have planted. I'm assuming that I'm dealing basically here with parents, so you think it in a parental situation and broaden it out into the church or school, whatever you might be considering, in addition to the home setting. Let me go back to that little paragraph and single out just two things. One of them is, you notice that I speak there about the basic dynamics. I have found that an awful lot of time is spent dealing with the behavior of people. or if you will, what's on the surface or what's coming out of them. I believe if we are going to be able to work effectively with people, we have to ask this question: why does he act the way he acts, or why does she act the way she acts? Don't get caught and lost in the action, but rather look back into the dynamics of what is causing them to act the way they are. Something like a television set. You can become ever so perturbed with what's on the screen, but the dynamics of the screen is what the studio is transmitting. To convert this in terms of working with a human being like yourself or a teenager, the application is simply this way. Maybe you like what's on my face and maybe you don't. Maybe you like my words and maybe you don't. Maybe you like the things I say and maybe you don't like the things I say. But you will never be able to affect a change in my life until you get back with understanding into why I said what I did and why I said it the way I said it. Second thing I'd like to point out in that little page is this. You notice that I speak about the teen years as grooming and cultivating. These are not years of planting. That was done in childhood. You know, to raise a child is something like planting a garden. If you want carrots and potatoes in the fall, you're going to have to plant them in the springtime. If you want to hoe the rows east and west, you're going to have to plant them that way in the springtime. I often get the picture that parents really don't like what they planted in a child, and when it comes to the teen years, they're going to make sure that they make the changes. It's something like taking a garden where the rows are planted east and west, and you say along in the summer, I just resent this business of rows pointed east and west. I'm going to hoe them north and south, and that's just what you set out to do. And by the time you get done, you look at the garden, you say, it's such a mess, let's give it up. Or fall comes and you say to yourself, I wish we had some tomatoes instead of all these carrots and potatoes. And the truth of the matter was, in the springtime, that's all you planted. To get tomatoes, you would have had to have planted them. To convert that in terms of a teenager is the same thing again. To get what you want in a teenager is to plant it in childhood. And when you come to the teen years, you're no longer planting. You're doing in the gardening process, you're hoeing, grooming, and cultivating what you planted. This is why there is no way for me to ever emphasize with parents the importance that you have just 9 years, and that's from day 1 to the 9th birthday to raise the child. If you build into the child what you want, and if you shape it the way it should be, the teen years will roll along very smoothly. There's a passage of Scripture I'd like to place before us. It's found in Colossians 3:21. Now, I know that this speaks more basically to children, but I'd like to make application to the teenager. It says, Fathers, don't scold or provoke your children to wrath, to the point of discouraging them and bringing them to the point where they will quit trying. Notice it doesn't say mothers. Why? Mothers aren't apt to do this. It says fathers. Why? Because fathers are more apt to do this. Notice that in these matters of raising a child and developing a teenager, our attitude as parents is extremely important all the way through from birth to adulthood. On the next page, many parents make the mistake of treating a child like a teenager and a teenager like a child. What do I mean by that? Many parents are very diplomatic with little children. You know, it's one of those things where you say to a little child, no, you cannot have candy before mealtime. A little child is a cute little manipulator already at the age of 2 or 3. So the little child takes the candy bowl, offers you candy. You think it's so cute, so smart, and then the little child can have the candy. Or you can't help but be just spellbound by the intelligence of your child, how when you tell little Susan to do something at the age of 3 or so, little Susan can say no, 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 and that is so cute. You play around with that for 8-10 years of little Susan's life with the idea I can always whip little Susie in shape, and one day you find out that you have a teenager on your hands, a big bad mouth. And it's at this point you start doing what you should have done 10 years ago. You should have been disciplining, correcting. You should have been establishing how life should have been lived and how behavior should have been coming out. Many parents play around diplomatically with their children, and all they can think of is how cute they are. And then when it gets to the teen years, they find out they have a big brat on their hands. They don't know what to do about the situation. They start applying childhood techniques. Spanking, shouting, scolding. And then they can't figure out why the youngster begins to unravel and now is old enough to leave home and forsake what you're saying, and thus he does. Before I get into some of the basics of raising the teenager, let me say a few things about the teenager that will just sort of warm us up and get a picture of him. On page 3, I make the statement, the teen years are like a dressing room. He goes in a child and comes out an adult. Now that's quite something. That's kind of like a revolving door. The teen years is a transition stage. You can speak of childhood as a rather permanent station in life, and then you can talk about adulthood as sort of a fixed station in life. But you can't talk about something being fixed in the teen years. Everything is kind of in the state of flux. It's in the state of change. Tremendous adjustments and changes are taking place. Such things, for instance, as physically, the youngster is undergoing some tremendous changes that affect his behavior, personality. In fact, it affects completely how he handles himself. You see, the mind has been used to handling a child's body, the size of a child. And suddenly, through sporadic growth, here this little child is a big adult, and the mind is not used to hands and feet and knees and elbows being extended out where they are. So he bumps his head, sits down at the table, almost upsets the table with a knee that just isn't supposed to be way out there. And when he reaches for the ketchup, he wipes out the salt and the pepper, not knowing that the hand was way out there. These are some rather traumatic things that a young person goes through. And remember, we were all teenagers, and if we think back, certainly we can recall a little bit of some of the frustrations we went through. For us to recall those and understand that is of tremendous help to the youngster. There's more happening. And I have observed it in my own children. I have seen parents struggle with it as they bring their young teenagers in for counseling. If you will have observed carefully, children don't grow by nice gradual increases, but rather by leaps and bounds, spurts, I guess would be the real word for it. Suddenly there are drastic changes physically. I'm going to describe it the way I see it and the way I believe it is. And I hope that you can form kind of a picture in your mind, and if you will maybe just close your eyes and let me put a little graft in your mind of just how this works, because it has an awful lot to do with the psychological of how a youngster behaves. First of all, when they hit the age of something like 12, 13, 14 in there, they go through these spurts of growth, and it goes something like this. All of a sudden, in a matter of maybe 3 to 6 weeks, they've added an inch or 2 or 3 to their total stature. While they shoot up physically and the body increases at an immense rate, I believe we can say that the body outgrows the glandular system. The body chemistry loses its balance. And as is true in adults, when the glands are deficient, you will see signs of depression showing up. And it's at this point, usually at the end of one of these sporadic jumps, that the young person will show signs of depression, gloom, despair, sadness. Quite often people panic. And quite often parents will jump on their youngster at this point and say, I don't know what's happened to your attitude lately, but you're the saddest person on earth and I can't figure it out. Well, the truth of the matter is he can't either. He doesn't know either what happened. As far as he's concerned, home hasn't changed and things are still going great. But life has just taken on a sad note and he doesn't know why. If you will watch, it isn't long, and if you don't create problems, in a very short time this attitude will change. It's something like physically on the inside of him everything catches up, and for a little while he's normal, and then something else will happen. Then it seems like that if there has to be more growth, the gland system once again overshoots itself, and now you have a hyperactive, hypertensive, very moody, very shifty type of young person on your hand. And now the parent is wondering why they went from the gloom to all of this radicalism and silliness. If you watch, then the body will begin to grow, and it isn't long you have a normal youngster again. However, if the body has more growing to do, it will keep up the rate of growth until once again it has overshot and the same type of gloom seems to return. I think now at this point, if you have raised or are raising a teenager, you know what I'm talking about, and I would like to say this. It is the most beautiful process I can think of in the development of the teenage person, and it's because God designed it that way so beautifully. When you catch on to this, you can't help but wait until you can work with teenagers or one of your own children can become a teenager so you can watch this work. The only point I like to make is this. When they are hypertensive or down in the valley of despair, don't create problems because of your misunderstanding at that point. But understand what is going on, and with patience, help them steady their lives off your steady life. They need this more than anything else. This is the main point I wanted to bring out on this page. You notice it affects us emotionally in a tremendous proportion, but something else too. Spiritually, when this much of the system is undergoing radical change and upsets, spiritually you're going to see it too. So as they move into some doubts and some uncertainties and things of this nature, don't panic. It's the main word I have for you working with teenagers. Don't panic. They mean well. They're doing their best. They will come out of it. If only the adults will stand by with some patience, deal with them kindly, and help them come through it. Let's turn the page. Page 5, we'll move along a little more quickly here because I just wanted to give you some picturesque things about a teenager. Teen years are like watching television, and I always get a bang about using this one with people. The parents begin to watch the program they made. Did you get that? Just think that through. It's like watching television. We begin to watch the program that we made. Turn the page. Teen years are like driving a car at 80 miles an hour and changing driver. I'm thinking about a little two-lane road. It goes like this. Dad and Mom begin to slide over while Johnny or Mary take the wheel. The car may sway, but if all keep their cool, it will work. There's just no nice way to go from the years of childhood innocency into the years of adulthood and responsibility, or to go from a stage in life where you never had to make a decision and suddenly all the responsibility and all the laws of the land and everything are resting upon you. It's a rather traumatic shift. It's an enormous adjustment. Let us take our time and let's do everything we can to help them through. Next page, or teen years are like gathering up a box of groceries. Now, if you turn the page, we have a couple illustrations here. On the top, you notice that the box of groceries is something like 85% full and 15% empty. That characterizes the childhood years, and in these years, basically, the parents did the selecting and the gathering and the packing of the groceries. Now, the illustration that's on the bottom of the page shows that the grocery box is filled, which simply means that in the teen years, the parents as well as the young person gathered and added the remaining part. The point I like to really emphasize is on the next page, and that is when he becomes an adult, he opens the box of groceries to eat what is there and make the best of, 1, what should not be there, 2, what is missing. You see the point that we keep making? We keep making this point and bringing this in front of you concerning childhood and the teen years, because the teen years is kind of an accumulation of everything that was done in childhood. It's a launching pad for adulthood, but it's kind of the climax of childhood too. And so much of what's in the teenager's life at this point that he is going to have to make life go on is what we put there and what we didn't put there. And he's going to have to start working with this and making life work for him. And I'm simply saying this: if we learn how to raise a child and groom out a teenager, we make the life's process simple, exciting. We make it easy. But if we do it haphazardly and stumble along, we develop problems that he's going to have to work through later on. If there are problems in your life and my life as a result of our childhood, we have to realize that these are things that need understanding and correcting, but things that got there not so much by way of the world as by way of the home. We act out much of our behavior in the world, but remember, we got the stuff for acting basically from the home. I often encourage parents raising children and teenagers who say, "Oh, this world is such a terrible place to raise children in." And I also have a lot of young couples who come in who have been married for 2-3 years, who have no children, who tell me they don't intend to because the world is such a wicked place. May I say this to anyone who has that attitude and that fear? The world is a place where we act out what we are, but the home is still the place where we are shaped. I say so often to parents, don't blame colleges for what they're doing to your youngster. Your youngster was shaped at home. People in churches often say, "What is the seminary doing to young people anyway? He was such a fine spiritual individual before he went to school, and by the time he got through college and seminary, just look, he doesn't have a spirit in him anymore." I like to formulate it this way: that when it really comes down to it, if a home shapes a child and a young person well, a college cannot corrupt him. It might alter it a little bit, but it cannot corrupt him. And let me say this concerning Christian colleges and seminaries too: if a home has not developed and shaped a youngster, it cannot straighten him out. The home is still the place that calls the shots and has the last word. What I'm going to do in the remaining pages of this booklet is to share with you and show you, beginning on page 15, this little thing called the pyramid. I'd like for you to note that the bottom of the pyramid picks up with age 12. That's where we left off in childhood, and goes on up to the top at something like the age 18 to 20. It's a progressive thing again, and remember, you don't have to learn it at age 12, and you don't have to have it mastered by the time you blow out the birthday candles on the 13th birthday. It's something that you have something like 8 or so years, 10 years to develop, to perfect. And the ultimate goal that every parent should have in mind concerning the teenager in his home is to reach a goal of fellowship. I like that word, fellowship. It's not a very common word in our society for some reason, and it seems awkward. We've lost the touch and the feeling for it. But fellowship is the ability to get along with people. It's where you establish common ground, where friendships, differences, all of these things are exercised, but in a way where you keep working together, moving together, and still keep building each other up. Now, since a teenager is an emerging adult, it is now very important that we establish this tie of fellowship in the home. And the reason I like to emphasize this is because this is one of the things, again, that's learned in life. You know, it's amazing that many adults believe we have to learn how to drive a car, we have to learn how to take the engine apart and put it back together. Oh, we have to learn how to build a house, and we have to learn how to do arithmetic, and we have to learn all these things. And when it comes to the things of the personality, you don't have to learn anything. You know, this doesn't add up. The educational programs, for instance, within churches often amount to this, where they have to learn the theology, they have to learn things of the Scripture, they have to memorize Bible verses. But when it comes down to the practical art, for instance, of knowing how to walk by faith, how much of that is taught? Where's the program that takes them by the hand and leads them through the deep waters often enough to feel the water and see that they can cross to the other side? Well, you know, most people have to learn all this the hard way in adulthood. Fellowship is learned, parents. We learn that. And the place where we learn it is at home. And if the home doesn't teach it, there's no place in society where it can be taught. The school can't teach it. The police force can't teach it. The church can't teach it. These are places where we can practice it on the street, the school, the church, but it has to be learned at home. More caught than taught, but yet we ought to be doing both. Well, it's exciting when we stop to think that teenagers in our home are not a chore. They're not a disciplinary liability. No, they're an asset for fellowship. Teenagers properly raised in childhood and parents having the right attitude toward them ought to be able to look forward to the nights where they can sit and talk with their teenagers. Every night my wife and I are home, we always sit around the kitchen table. We just spend time together talking. And this has been a tradition in our home all the years that we've been married. And as our children grow up, they just love to sit in and listen to what we're talking about, offer their suggestions, laugh along with us, and learn about the things of life right around that old kitchen table at night. There's fellowship there. And when they grow up and leave home, we're going to miss something, except my wife and I will still be there. Page 17, the first step in building and achieving this goal of fellowship is communication. Communication in teen years is the ability to express thoughts and feelings to others in such a way others will do the same with them. And I hope you read this through a number of times. Every word counts. It says there it's the ability to express thoughts and feelings in such a way that others would do the same. Where does this start? It starts with the parents. And you know, most parents are yelling at their young people, and the young people can think of nothing but walk out or yell back. To communicate means to share, to exchange things from each other's life. And the result of it is we learn this at home, where parents learn how to control their thoughts and feelings and to express these, and to do it in such a way that the teenager will want to do the same. For him to do it, of course, he will have to feel that he's in a safe environment. This one links very closely with the next one, so on the next page you notice step 2 in the pyramid is understanding. And to understand is to develop the art of listening to others acceptantly, and to dare to consider how it might benefit self personally. I like that little line. We share each other's life by expressing it through words, feelings, thoughts, for the sake of understanding. And understanding is to be able to sit where the other person sits. You do not understand your youngster, the young man or the young lady in your home, unless you can honestly say you have sat where they sit, and you have seen what they see, and you have felt what they feel. A young teenager said to me the other day, he was describing the school he goes to. It's a mixed race one that's filled with gangs, and they carry knives, many of them. He goes with fear and trembling, and he said to me just the other day in the counseling session, I wish Dad could shrink down to my size once, to go to school in my place to see what it's like. No adult has ever been fair to the young man or the young woman in their household until they can honestly say, I've sat where they've sat, I've seen what they've seen, I've laughed at what they laughed at, I've cried at what they've cried at. Only then can you say, you understand. I can hear parents say what they often say, well, how do you get them to talk that way? I just can't get mine to open up. Well, that's why it says here that we have to develop the art as parents of listening acceptantly. Accept them. So they're ready to tell you about something in their life that the truth of the matter is you aren't going to like. Now, maybe you don't like what you're going to hear, but it's very important that you can accept them. You see, they're a creature made by God. God has endowed them with much wisdom and understanding and much of His own beauty. And it's very important as parents that of all the people we love in the world, that we love with a closeness the young adult who has modeled himself after us, who has really tried his best to be us in the hopes of pleasing us. And for us to listen acceptantly, and for us to dare to consider how it might benefit ourselves personally. Just because you're 30 years older or so than your teenager is no sign you can't learn something from them. They can learn much from you, but don't think there aren't things you can't learn from them. We as parents need to listen. Then as parents, we need to train the young person through example. Now, everything that I'm going to say from here on in the pyramid, will happen more or less automatically if you have mastered the bottom two of how to communicate and to understand the young person. On the next page, we add the word we anticipated, acceptance. Acceptance is the ability to take our teenager for what he is and allow him to make changes and improvements as he sees fit. Remember, when he was a child, you could walk in and change him. But now he's a young adult. People often say, well, how far can you push a child, a teenager? And I always say to them, you can't push them any further than what you could push your neighbor. But if you will treat him with the kindness and the patience that you would a close neighbor, you will get the same neighborly results. Common sense will dictate that much. If you will accept the teenager for what he is and keep rubbing off next to him what you are, and allow him to make changes and improvements, there's the secret. Because you see, he wants to do what is right if we will allow him to. He's emerging into adulthood, which means independence, self-identification. And every time you push, you threaten that system, and he's going to resist. So, be a gentleman about it. Give him the chance to change. Turn the page. You see, the next one is trust. Trust is a relationship that lowers anxiety and builds inward security. It's the application of stable understanding and acceptance that says to him, you will make it. And my, how our young people have to hear that from us adults today. You can make it. When the news is all through blurring the scene of life and casting all kinds of shadow of despair, tell your young person some of the times you've lived through historically. I can remember the bombing of Pearl Harbor. I can remember when we had blackouts in the United States and the gloomy reports were that the enemy would be on our shores by the next morning. And I can remember I was just a child at the time and how I used to look into the face of my dad and my mother with this question, is there hope? And every time I could see there was hope, I said, we can go on, we'll make it. I like to remind you of this point very emphatically. In fact, if you have a pencil, why don't you just circle the word trust in your little booklet? Without trust, his world will deteriorate and disintegrate fast, and you will both lose. I don't care what he has done that's wrong. You cannot come out of it if you can't renew the trust. On the next page is love. And love is that beautiful, ever-present atmosphere that we breathe. Love is like the softness of rain that beautifies what is present and brings into being what will be. The quality of it is far more important than the quantity. The last thing we add to the pyramid is touch. And in the teenager, touch is the confirmation of all you have been saying verbally. It must be done in a wholesome way. You turn the page, I like to give you a good note of encouragement that could change all your relationships with your teenager. As a parent, I want you to understand that you can correct anything in his life if you will follow the 3 simple steps I'm about to give you. First, you must first correct it in your own life. In other words, if you're an impatient and fiery person, and he's fiery, and you fire, and he fires, you start by not how to get him to stop firing, but how you stop firing. In other words, patience. If there's going to be patience in this thing, it has to come off your end, my end, as a parent. Number 2, talk it over with him. When you've made the change, Why don't you do something like this? Take the youngster aside and say to him or her something like this: Mary, you know, as your mother, I have come to learn some things about my life that I didn't used to know. And I can see that I have built these little problem areas into your life. Now, maybe you would like to correct those, and maybe you wouldn't someday. I guess it's pretty well up to you, but what I wanted to do today is I wanted to explain to you what I learned about myself and how I put that in you, and maybe you'd like to correct it someday. And I'd like to tell you so that if you'd like to, you'll be able to correct it too. And I want to assure you that if you can be that genuine and down to earth and honest about the whole thing, first take time to get it corrected in your own life. And if you can be that genuine and honest to talk it over with them, they will never forget you for being a genuine parent. And point 3 is this: give him the time to change. After all, if you are 35, 40 years old and you only just made the change in your life, and the teenager is 16 or 18, if they correct it there, they've already made 15, 20 years of improvement over your life. Don't expect them to change right there, and if they don't, and then you go off and pout, don't do it. Give them time to change. My strongest note of encouragement to you is this, as parents: those youngsters want to make it at home more than any other place in the world, regardless what you think. Deep down inside, they want happiness and fellowship at home first. The only reason it might not be there is because you haven't allowed it at this point. Not intentionally, but unintentionally. And now you see how it could be. Now go back and correct it. And remember this: you can't do anything without trust. Would you like to pray with me? Let's pray. Dear Father, deepen my love and fellowship with my teenage youngsters so that they can become all you intended them to be. Thank you for our family and our home. And now enable us to do what we have just learned. Amen.